much earlier podcast than we normally do, but that's okay. It's kind of a special podcast, and today we're going to have a special guest, Congressman Russ Fulcher, who will be joining us here in just a second. But before we do that, we're going to roll our very over-the-top stinger, and we'll bring on Congressman Fulcher. All right, so I wanted to bring on Congressman Fulcher because it's, with the Israel war going on and with this fight over the speakership, a lot of Idahoans have been very curious and watching this speaker vote like a hawk, so to speak. And so I felt like it'd be a good idea to have him come on and just kind of talk about what he's hearing there on Capitol Hill. And so with that, I'm going to bring on Congressman Fulcher here real quick. All right. Congressman, how are you?
Good morning, Greg. Great to talk to you again. I wish it was in Idaho instead of DC, but that's the nature of the beast right now.
Yeah, well, you got the decoration behind you. That's something. So
that's right. That's right.
I have to tell you, my wife always calls you Idaho's Dan Aykroyd, and I'm sure you get that all the time. But every time she's like, "Oh, Dan Aykroyd."
So, well, I wish I had his checking account, but
right.
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah. So anyway, well, I know you're extremely busy, and we're starting a little late on the podcast there, but that's okay. But I really do appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on and just talk about. I mean, it's the world seems like it's always crazy, and right now it seems like it's extra crazy thanks to Joe Biden. Like the whole country, the whole world just seems like it's falling apart with Biden at the helm. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, absolutely agree. And we are not helping on the House front, but our president, in my view, is absolutely compromised. He is not 100% there. Even when he is, his philosophical bent is not healthy as far as I'm concerned. Our vice president lacks the acumen for the job, and now we don't have a speaker. And so we have a leadership void in Washington, D.C., Greg, and this is not a good time with world events, especially to be in that situation, but that's where we are.
Yeah, so let's get into the speaker fight, which, I mean, realistically has been going on since the beginning of the year, right? When we had that big fight and it went 15 rounds, like a boxing match. And I don't know that we've ever felt like it's been settled since that fight. And then obviously there was the motion to vacate, and Speaker McCarthy was taken out in that vote. Can you explain kind of the dynamics of what you saw during that motion to vacate? And you voted to vote with Speaker McCarthy at that time, and you've now since been voting for Representative Jim Jordan. Why the initial vote against the motion to vacate, and why have you now thrown your support behind Congressman Jordan?
Well, when the motion to vacate to remove McCarthy came up, there was no plan in place to replace him, and no pathway forward that the initiators of that motion had charted out. And so I was afraid, and a number of others were afraid that what has happened would happen. And here we are. Greg, the thing to point out here is that was every single Democrat in the building and 8 Republicans. And so to make this look like this is Republican revolt is absolutely false. This is with Democrats basically in part manipulating a handful of Republicans into getting rid of the Republican Speaker of the House. And we were divided when McCarthy got elected. You may recall back in January, we were at 15 rounds to get him in place. And there was no other obvious member at the time that could get the number of votes that McCarthy had. And I know Kevin reasonably well, and nobody is perfect. And I'm not saying that he was, but we were making some progress. We, for the first time since 1998, maybe it's 1996, We were running appropriations bills on a single subject. We were making amendments to every single one. We were going till 2 or 3 a.m. every morning, and we should. That's how that works, to run amendments on these bills. And there was massive cuts. We were holding the mandatory spending, which is Social Security, Medicare, defense, and veterans, stable, but everything else was taking about 25 to 30% cuts, and we were making some significant progress. And so to basically pull the pin on that grenade in the midst of some pretty good progress, I think was just a real bad thing to do. And now we're living with the ramifications of it.
So, I guess we are where we are now because what has happened, and McCarthy's out, and it doesn't sound like he's come back in. I guess what I saw after the initial ouster and what I'm seeing now is that the conservative base seems to largely be behind, like, hey, look, we finally did something. We got rid of McCarthy, and even though he may have been better than Paul Ryan or John Boehner, now we can put in somebody good like Jim Jordan, right? And so that's kind of where we find ourselves now. And I guess what I find is interesting is that we're always told as conservatives, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, that look, you just have to, the Republicans need to vote like the Democrats and just all stick together no matter what. But that's not happening now either, right? And so it seems like the tables are almost flipped to where there's a block of people who do not want Jordan. Maybe they like Jordan, but they don't want maybe Gates to have the credit for getting Jordan in or something. Is there a path forward? Do you see a path forward with Jordan, or do we end up with somebody else down the road?
Well, Jim Jordan would be great, and to be perfectly blunt, he was my choice from the very get-go, and I am actively involved in trying to get him additional support now.
Sure.
Jim would be an absolutely great leader, and if we can get him in that slot, then frankly, there will be a happy ending that came as a result of that. But right now, we just don't have those votes. Let me just kind of lay out a little bit of a dynamic that maybe not everyone's thought about.
Sure.
So in the Idaho State Legislature, across the state, we've got a relatively significant philosophical divide, even among the Republicans.
Sure.
And I realize that. You've realized that when you've worked with them. When I was in Senate leadership, it was difficult to herd 35 Idaho State Senator cats, and now take that to 435 and broaden it from California to New York. And therein lies the biggest challenge for the speaker. I think it's the worst job in politics. There's no question that there's a philosophical divide between Republicans and modern day Democrats. But I would just point out to people, as Republicans, it's within our DNA, it's within our platform beliefs to be independent, to be more liberty-minded, more self-sufficient. The modern day Democrat is not that way. They are much more compliant when it comes to leadership. Everybody says, oh, they stick together so well. Well, that's part of who they are. They're much more accepting of government control, and that's just the nature of that beast. So it's going to be naturally harder to get Republicans to coalesce around a single person. It's going to be naturally harder to get us to agree on things, and that's what you see playing out. The other thing I would say is, ultimately, this is not about Jim Jordan. And it wasn't even about Kevin McCarthy, other than the personal vendetta with he and Gates. But it really, the base issue wasn't about Jim. It wasn't about Kevin. It wasn't about Steve Scalise or whoever the next person is that puts their name in the ring. What this is about business as usual within Washington, D.C. and the status quo versus a significant change in how things are done. Now, Kevin may have been part of that status quo, if you will, but because of the pressure on him with his 15 rounds and with his speakership, he was functioning, with a lot of change. And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier, that we were running these single subject bills. We were cutting the budget substantially. That was a pretty good direction. And so that's why I think it was a mistake to pull that pin on that grenade when we did. But nevertheless, to your point, it is done. But that's the base issue. So when Jim Jordan comes up for a vote on the floor, like he has twice so far, you've got a large percentage of the body that says, "Yeah, we trust this guy, and he's gonna make significant changes or continue significant changes on the floor." And then you've got the much more moderate base that says, "No, we don't want you all to see a win as a function of what they see as bad behavior. We're just not going to coalesce with that. It's not about Jim so much; it's about some of those who support Jim and changing the system and how the House is run." So I know that's kind of may sound convoluted, but that's the dynamic as best as I can describe it.
Yeah, and I've said the same thing that you mentioned earlier, that Democrats all stick together because they really don't have any values. Like they'll just do what they're told by leadership at the end of the day. They don't care where, like you said, there are factions of the establishment and factions of the more conservative base that they have their values and they have what they believe in, and they will stick to that to the end, which is this really precarious position. I guess for me, the motion to vacate and everything, I think for a long time, Congressman, people have they're so fed up with Washington, D.C., and they've almost wanted something like this to go, hey, finally, somebody just said, you know what, we're gonna hold somebody accountable. We're gonna, and again, setting aside whether McCarthy should or should not have been ousted at that time, I think people were kind of like, oh, hey, we can make change in the Republican Party. We can make this change, and plan or no plan. I think people have been kind of drawn to that to some extent, and now they're looking at Speaker Jordan going, holy crap, if Jordan gets in, we'll have the most conservative speaker maybe ever, maybe more than Newt Gingrich, when Newt Gingrich seemed like he was a lot more conservative, I think. But so I think that's kind of what people are drawn to. But to your point, I don't see. I'm not sure what the path out is right now, because again, like you said, there's a block that just doesn't want Gates to win. And now if you get a moderate in there, you're going to have to get the Democrats to agree to the moderate
Right.
to come on board.
And so you're right. And this can have a very happy ending. If we can get out of this with Jim, I would be ecstatic. And so I continue to actively work with and for him in the effort to become speaker. Here's my fear. As we're having this conversation, just down the hall, there is a group of members who are having discussions with Democrat colleagues on the possibility of a coalition leadership, which I think would be a disaster.
Yeah.
And there's also talk of taking pro tem Speaker Patrick McHenry and giving him basically the full speakership capacity between now and the end of the year, and just to get things moving again on the House floor. And so, there are degrees of options, but none of them, with the exception, at least in my view, of Jim being speaker outright, has got a positive ending to what took place on that vacate. The vacate move, in my understanding, has been around forever. I don't know that people really even knew about it until it was threatened with John Boehner back in about 2016, I think it was, and Boehner wound up resigning. It wasn't actually executed. To my knowledge, this is the first time it's ever really happened. But it's also important to point out that when Pelosi was speaker the second time, she got her conference to change that rule to where it took 51% of the body to do it, not just one person could make the motion. Yeah. And so she had killed it, and that was one of the things that we put back in place when McCarthy took over as speaker in January, was to reinstate that rule. And again, here we are. This could have a happy ending, but this could end up in a very bad way, because there's a lot of my colleagues who want this done so bad they're willing to do almost anything to get the House moving again.
Yeah. So I guess on getting the House moving again and shifting gears, Israel is at war after just absolutely horrific terrorist attack, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of videos, and and pictures out of there. What have been your thoughts on the Israel war so far? There's calls by some now, especially on the Democrat side, for Israel to scale it back and hold back and everything. And what are your thoughts, Congressman, on the Israeli war?
Yeah, it's amazing now that Hamas does this heinous attack and wipes out whatever the number is now, 1,400 or in that arena, Israelis, and then they take a bunch of hostages, including Americans. Then all of a sudden, ceasefire. Well, that doesn't fly, and nor should it. Hamas not only wants to eliminate Israel, Greg, but they want to suck everyone else into the process and escalate a much more broad war. That's why the heinous acts. That's why the hostages. And so they knew going into this that there would be significant response from Israel and from probably the US and other countries. And that's exactly what they want. They want this to escalate. They want to bring in Hezbollah. They want to bring in Iran. They want to bring in other countries and make this thing a much more broad conflict. So the challenge for us in America is we've got to act. We've got to support Israel, and we've got to do something to get our hostages back, and then do the best we can to keep it from escalating. And so this is terrorism at its worst, and that's what we are dealing with. And let me just jump into another related topic, if you will, because every single day, especially being driven out of the Senate, is this mention of, well, we need to combine our efforts in legislation and support for Israel and Ukraine. No, this is two entirely different circumstances. With Israel, that's a longtime ally. We have a memorandum of understanding for a defense package, and that's been there for decades. They are a legitimate democracy, and they're only one in the Middle East. We get intelligence information from Israel on a routine basis that is extremely valuable. These are our friends. These are our partners, and they have been for decades, and they deserve our support, and we'll get it. On the Ukrainian front, totally different situation. We've already put about 113 billion, is my understanding, into that effort. And although there's a democratically elected leader, they really function more as a dictatorship. There's other ways to approach this at this point, rather than just continuing to send money, continuing to send arms that we don't have or can't afford, by the way, to fund this thing on a proxy level. So two different circumstances there, tragic scenario in both, but we need to handle those and respond differently to each case.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about what you saw as the difference between funding, and helping Israel versus funding and helping Ukraine. What do you believe, if anything, is America's role in terms of? I know, like right now, there's a lot of concern, especially somebody like myself as a veteran, and we are heading very, very quickly into global conflict, on multiple fronts. And it really does feel like World War III is right around the corner. What do you believe America's role should be, if any, with boots on the ground in terms of either Ukraine or Israel?
Well, let's set the stage just a little bit deeper. First of all, we are not prepared for this right now. We have been shipping arms from our stockpile, munitions to Ukraine, and we've been selling it. And that's different, and that's better, to Taiwan. And so the stockpiles that we have for our armed forces is substantially lower than, at least in my view, that it should be. Couple that with $33 trillion in debt, and a leader, at least in the White House, my view, that it is not full capacity, and even when he was not gifted when it came to foreign policy. So this is a bad circumstance all the way around. To answer your question directly, we have Americans that are being held hostage by a bunch of savages in Gaza Strip or in Israel or related in a surrounding area.
Sure.
We got to do what we got to do to get them out. And if that means, as far as I'm concerned, if that means American troops, boots on the ground, we go get them. And I'm on a much, much, much smaller scale. I can tell you, I'm proud of my own office and the other members' offices for helping assist getting not just Idahoans, but Americans out of Israel that were there either on business or on holiday or whatever. But the bottom line is there are hostages there against their will. We need to do what we got to do to get them out. And with the breadth of the attack, get some munitions in there to help reinforce the Iron Dome, get that replenished. Again, these are our friends, these are our allies, and we're ingrained with them. We just got to do what we got to do. I do not support boots on the ground in Ukraine for the reasons mentioned earlier.
Sure.
And if we continue that level of massive support, in that case, I think we're actually reducing the incentive to stop that conflict. There's other ways to address that with the Ukraine-Russia situation by raising the cost to Russia in other ways, cutting off their revenue stream, shutting down their ability to export oil, which is how they get their money, and shut them off in other ways, starve them to death economically. I think is a much better approach with Russia as opposed to funding a proxy battle with Ukraine.
Sure. Okay. Was there any Idahoans that are either captured or killed in the attack, or do you know if there's been Idahoans that were rescued out of Israel at this time?
There's at least 18 that I'm aware of that were with a touring group that have made it safely back to the United States. But there's none that I'm aware of that were part of the hostage package or still there against their will. And that doesn't mean they're not there.
Sure.
But I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Well, good that we got the other ones out then. So that's good. Yeah. I don't know. Having served in Iraq, I mean, you're just talking about, like you said, they love the conflict. A lot of these tribes love to bring in conflict, and again, with the guy we got in the White House right now, it just feels like we are really, really close to this whole thing just absolutely exploding. And so hopefully you guys are successful in, like you said, navigating the waters enough to keep us from, us and really the whole world from just diving into this massive conflict. But, there's calls even from our own side to some extent for like, hey, Israel, go take out the bad guys, and then let's, kind of tone it down after that. And
Greg, there's one other thing we need to talk about on a related note. For nearly 2 years, we've had an open southern border. And crossing that border is a whole host of people. We have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
And I believe I believe there's been about 1,500, and I don't hold me to this, I'm going from memory, but in that range of people that we have actually apprehended that have been on the security watch list. Well, that's probably a drop in the bucket compared to who actually came in. Yeah. The enemy is within at this point because of our policies. Thank you to this administration for an open southern border. That translates to a tremendous risk right here at home. And to your point, the culture, the Islamic radical culture of jihad or desire to escalate wars, just because that's just part of it there. And it can't be explained other than perhaps through a biblical perspective. But the bottom line is it's there. And you take that and you trigger it in Israel like it has been done, that escalates. Do not be surprised at all if we have major issues right here at home, because we have a lot of that influence that has come through our southern border without any type of filter. So we are at risk probably now more than at any other time, I think, for domestic conflict as a function of that, which is a tragedy and a huge mistake by this current administration.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of conservatives are like, look, we got to fix our own border. We can't keep sending all this money over to all these other problems when we have this big gaping problem right here on the border. It got so bad that even Biden administration was like, hey, maybe we should build a wall. It's just like, seriously, after you've
all
let
of this,
how many people in?
you get my colleagues in Texas. By the way, I've been to the border multiple times, and it's just as bad as you see on the worst news broadcasts. I mean, this is blatant, and it takes the mayor of New York and Chicago to make noise about a handful of people, relatively speaking,
Right.
before he does anything, compared to just a flood of people coming across in Arizona and Texas and the border states. So he's finally acting, but way too late.
Yeah, way too. No, honestly, that move to send illegals and just start shipping them to these Democrat cities, these what do they call them? Not safe havens.
Yeah, right here, I've seen them being delivered right here in Washington D.C. and frankly, point made. And I don't blame the governors of Texas and Florida at all for doing that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Congressman. Well, I know you're busy. I know there's another vote today, right? I think at noon your time or something like that.
I don't think, I'm looking at my calendar as we speak here. I don't think it's formally been set. We will likely gather again as a conference. There's been overnight that I'm aware of 2 additional names that have been brought up as possible candidates, as coalition candidates. I don't think either one has the support. That's part of the issue, but undoubtedly that will be brought up. Plus, I anticipate more conversations about the possibility of a bridge the gap strategy with Patrick McHenry. That's probably where we're going to go first. So I anticipate we'll be doing a conference here within the next hour or so.
Okay. Awesome. All right, sir. Well, we appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on, and it's good to see you again. It's been a little
Greg,
bit.
Let me just say this as we close. I appreciate who you are and what you do. You and I have known each other for a long time. You had a very positive impact in the state of Idaho for not just Second Amendment rights, but just First Amendment rights as well. Just you're appreciated very much. Thank you for your voice and for the opportunity to communicate with your listening audience.
Awesome. All right, Congressman Fulcher, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll let Congressman Fulcher go. I know he's off and heading back into the DC swamp to try and figure out who our new speaker is going to be, if we're going to have one anytime soon. The Congressman and I probably have some disagreements on in fact, I got disagreements with some of our own supporters on this whole issue of the motion to vacate. And, here's the thing. Everybody talks about, they needed a plan on the motion to vacate. There should have been a plan in place. But here's the problem, and you're kind of seeing the result of that right now, is that if there was a plan, if Matt Gaetz said, we're going to do a motion to vacate and we're going to immediately nominate Jim Jordan, you're going to get what you have now, which is that Gaetz and all of the people who supported the motion to vacate support Jim Jordan. Well, guess what? Now the establishment, including Congressman Mike Simpson, I wonder if he'll come on the show. I highly doubt it. Now they're just going to go against anybody that Gaetz supports. And so to some extent, and I don't know if this is what Gaetz' plan was or if he had a plan. Maybe he didn't have a plan. I don't really know. But it was almost like Gaetz and the rest of them should have just kind of kept quiet after the motion to vacate, because whoever they threw their support behind would immediately, the establishment, and that's what you're seeing, and that's kind of what Congressman Fulcher talked about, is now the establishment does not want Gaetz to have a win, so they're just going to vote against anybody. And so we're definitely in a deadlock now, which is not necessarily a bad thing for Congress to be in, not passing more big government legislation. But we're in a deadlock because now if a moderate comes forward, unless they can get the Democrats on board, that moderate is also not going to have the support of the conservative wing, no matter what. And so we're definitely in this really interesting conundrum, so to speak, of I'm not sure who can bridge that gap. I'm not sure who can finally come in the middle and say, look, I'll be the guy that can pull people in. Like Congressman Fulcher said, there's 2 more names that are kind of floating around. Odds are they're not going to, because I would think it's got to be somebody most of us would know offhand, and I just can't think of who that might be. So I do want to say, like, there's a number of congressmen yesterday out of the 22 who voted against Jim Jordan that were like, I will not be threatened. I will not be, intimidated into voting, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I would love to see those individuals' actual threats, number one. And I'm not saying that they didn't happen, but look, you are going against the will of the people. When you do that, you can expect some very impassioned responses. None of them probably any serious actual threats. I think if there are threats, they should be taken seriously. But look, the American people right now, I can guarantee you Congressman Simpson's phone lines and emails are lit up with Idahoans from down here in his district, where I am from, by the way, who want him to pick Congressman Jordan, who want him to support him. And so you're going to get some very angry people because you're ignoring the will of the people. Look, Simpson is bought and paid for. Everybody knows that. But there's nobody to challenge him. Everybody keeps asking me, who can challenge him down here? Look, I live down here. First of all, beating a congressman, the guy's been in there since I was like 15, I think. The late 90s, maybe. He's been in there forever. It's really hard to beat an incumbent. Simpson is what somebody had mentioned was called an appropriator. Like, he just goes out for these big lobbyists and he works for them to get them what they need. Okay. He's not working for us anymore. Hasn't been for a really long time. This is also a more moderate part of the state. Okay. Congressman Fulcher represents the 1st congressional district, which covers all of northern Idaho, which is the most conservative part of the state. And then they both kind of converge in the Boise area. So is there somebody who can beat Simpson? I don't believe so. And to be quite frank, I don't know that the speaker fight is really something the average person really cares about. If I went and asked the average person who Jim Jordan was, they'd be like, who the frick is that? Like, I don't know who that is. But if you're plugged into politics, and you've been following politics, but the average voter probably doesn't know and maybe won't care in the end. I know the large conservative base that is down here, they're certainly making themselves vocal, but all the moderate liberals and the Democrats are all very happy with Mike Simpson right now. So I don't know. He's got gobs and gobs of money. I'm just not sure there's anybody out there that can beat him. So we'll see. Well, thanks again, Congressman Fulcher, for coming on. We appreciate you taking time out of your very busy day to come and speak to Idahoans about what is happening. That's kind of all I've got for now. This has been a very early broadcast of the Freedom Bros podcast. Dustin is traveling, so that's why he wasn't here today either. He's in DC. He just sent me a picture of him on it. He was going to try and get on from the train, and it didn't quite. He was like, yeah, I don't think this is a good idea. So Dustin wasn't able to jump on, but we appreciate you guys tuning in. We do have another episode coming up on Monday night. And then next Thursday, I'm going to be working to get a bunch of the Caldwell School Board and City Council candidates. There's a huge battle in Caldwell right now, where I used to live, by the way, a few years ago until I moved down to Rigby. But there's a huge fight there. I want to try and get Doug Masterson on, as well as lots of other legislative candidates as they continue to file to run for office. So lots going on, guys. I appreciate you tuning in. Please be sure to share this video, give us a thumbs up, and get on our Rumble channel. We're still 20 people away from that first 100 followers, and we'd love to have you guys on there. So other than that, I got to get back to work for the rest of my day. Take care. God bless.